So today's focus is on the getting the hang of concept builder and the thoughts and ideas you need to consider when doing this concept builder. So here we are looking at two balloons that are attracted to each other or pulling towards each other. Balloon A is positively charged, and we know that A and B are attracted to each other. So balloon A is positive, and these two are attracted to each other. So, some key things you need to consider when you're doing this concept builder is like charges attract. So, like charges repel. So, positive and positive, those would repel. Negative and negative, those would repel. Okay. Neutral charges or opposite charges attract. So, a positive and a negative would attract. And then when we think about something that's neutral, has a charge of 0 overall, neutral charges always attract other charged objects. So neutral and a positive attract, and neutral and a negative also attract each other. Okay, so when we think about A being positive, positive charges are attracted to negative charges and attracted to neutral charges. So when I go to choose, I can choose more than one here. My answers are going to be negative or neutral. That doesn't mean that B is both negative and neutral. It means that it could be negative or it could be neutral given the information we have here. Okay. So positive and positive repel, negative and negative repel, positive and negative attract, neutral and positive attract, neutral and negative attract. Okay. Those are the key things you need to remember when doing this whole concept builder. So let me clear this screen and we'll hit check answer. We got it right. We can move on. Okay. The last thing I want to talk about in this trophy before we look at some more complicated examples is an example that talks about where we have these neutral paper bits either attracting or not interacting. Okay, so let's go through this one. We have balloon A is negative, so I know balloon A is negative, and A and B attract. So what that tells me, this is the first information we're given. This is the second information. So let's look at the first information and then we'll see if it can get more specific using the second. So A and B attract, A is negative. So what that tells me just in this first information is that B is either positive or neutral, 0. Okay, I'm using 0 for neutral. The second information tells me that B attracts to the neutral paper bits. The other thing you need to consider when doing this concept builder is neutral objects, objects that have a charge of 0, will attract charged objects, but they will not interact with other neutral objects. Okay, two neutral objects. If you have a neutral and a neutral, basically nothing's going to happen. Okay, you're not going to see anything happening. Okay, so when we consider this, from our first bit of information, I know that B is positive or neutral. But now that I see that B attracts neutral paper bits, I know that it can no longer be neutral and B has to be positive because it's attracting something that is neutral. If B was neutral, it would not interact with the paper bits. So I know that B is just positive. Okay, clear my screen, check answer. We got it right. So those are kind of the key things you need to keep in mind when you work through this. Let's go back and let's look at a more complicated situation and look at the one here. Okay, so we have A is negative, so I know for sure that A is negative. Okay, and remember, we're thinking about these as two separate sets of information. I want to think about what's telling me in one, and then once I consider the options for what B could be in one, I want to consider what's the more information is given in two. Okay? A is negative, and A and B are attracting each other. So that tells me that B is positive or neutral. B is positive or neutral. Okay? Taking that into consideration for part 2, it says B and C repel each other. Okay? So B is positive or neutral. C, we're trying to figure out what balloon C is. Anything that is neutrally charged is not going to repel other things. Neutral charges only attract charged objects. They don't repel anything. So what that tells me is B is definitely positive because neutral objects will never repel. And that means that C is also positive because it's repelling the positive charge of B. Okay, so then I choose positive there. Got it right. Let me clear this screen. Go back and look at another one in this trophy. This is a really good one to look at because it has a lot of critical thinking we have to do to get through to this one. So looking at this one here, we have that balloon A is positive. We know that because they tell us that for sure. Okay. And remember, with these, we want to work in steps. This is the first information we're given. So this drives what we think about step 2. And this helps us kind of narrow down what we're thinking about in step 3. Okay. So it's always giving us more information to make us think more about exactly what is happening in this scenario. Okay. So A is positive. We know that for sure. They tell us that here. A is positive. So it says A and B attract. So with just thinking about information 1, I know that B is either going to be, since they attract, negative or neutral. Okay. B is negative or neutral. Okay. When I look at C then, so this is B. B is negative or neutral. What I need to think about is, and this is because A is positive. For C, if B was negative, that means that C, since it's attracting in step 2 here, if B was negative, C could be, since it's attracting, positive, or it could be neutral. Let me fix that real quick. Positive, or it could be neutral. If B was neutral, that means that C, since it's attracting, could be positive or negative if B was neutral. Okay, so these, if we look, these are my options for B, and these are my options now for C. Okay, based on if B was negative or neutral. C could be positive, neutral, or if it was neutral, it could be positive or negative. Okay, let's see what this third information tells us. This third part of information tells us that B does not attract or does not interact with neutral paper bits, meaning that if B was negative, it would interact with those neutral bits. But since B is not interacting, that tells me that B is not negative. It tells me that B is neutral. Okay, B is neutral because it's not interacting. So the only options that leaves me with for C is C has to be positive or negative since we know that B is neutral. Okay, clear the screen. So we're trying to figure out what C is. We found out that it's positive or negative since we found out that B is neutral. Okay, we check our answer, get that right, can move on to another one. Let's look at this one then. And we'll go through our options again and see if we can figure it out. Making this kind of flow chart is what helps me in deciding what each of them are. So it says A is negative. So A is negative. Okay. A and B repel each other. So the only thing that repels a negative charge is another negative charge. So the only option for B, because it can't be positive charges don't repel negative charges, and it can't be neutral. So because neutral charges does not repel negative charges. So B has to be negative. So now that I know A is negative, B is definitely negative. Okay, so that's what the first part of information tells me. The second part, B is negative, B and C attract, so that means that C can either be positive or neutral. Okay, then I look at my third amount of information. It says C attracts the neutral paper. That means that C can no longer be neutral, because if it was neutral, it wouldn't attract that paper. But since it's attracting the paper, it tells me that the only option for C now is to be positive. Okay, so it says balloon C is ... positive. Okay, clear this screen. That is what you need to think through. You need to kind of make a list of all the options as you work through this and think about what is the first set of information telling me, what's the second set, and if there's a third set of information, how does that inform me on what is going on in this situation?